we start our hour in Europe, where in the latest development, European leaders stress the need for a diplomatic solution to protect Ukraine and Europe's security ahead of the Alaska summit between Trump and Putin. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky thanked allies for their support, emphasizing a fair end to the war and warning against Russian deception. Meanwhile, Ukraine's military announced a key victory in the Sumy region. Ukrainian forces have liberated Bezsalivka village, clearing Russian troops from this frontline area. We're now joined by Ross Feingold, who's a political analyst. He joins us from Taipei, Taiwan, to discuss this in further detail. Ross, as always, pleasure to have you on the program. Ross, huge development coming yesterday of this announced Trump-Putin meet in the American state of Alaska. However, the stress today has come from Ukraine's European allies, saying that Ukraine has to be a part of these talks, especially to reach a fair end to the war. If Ukraine is not involved in this meeting between Trump and Putin whatsoever, do you think there's any risk here of it becoming the exact opposite of that?
Well, the risk for Ukraine is that the United States is going to come back from the summit with a set of parameters that might be something Ukraine simply doesn't want to agree to. So Trump might persuade Putin to make certain kinds of concessions, a medium or even a long-term ceasefire. Most likely this would involve Russia continuing to occupy large parts of eastern Ukraine. And again, the possibility, and the Europeans clearly don't support this, but the possibility is Trump and the United States is going to come back to Zelensky afterwards and say, these are the parameters, you better take it or leave it. And if you leave it, you're going to make President Trump extremely angry.
Indeed, Ross. We now know that Russia controls around 20% of Ukrainian territory. Do you believe that Russia will be satisfied with this? Given the fact that Ukraine has said it will make no concessions, including that of Crimea, which was annexed in 2014 by Russia. What are your thoughts when it comes to territory? Donald Trump has said that there's going to be some possible territorial swaps here. Do you see Ukraine giving in that regard?
President Trump meant when he said land swaps, because I don't think there's any possibility of Russia giving land to Ukraine in exchange for what Russia is currently occupying. What I think President Trump meant was that Ukraine is going to have to accept the reality that part of its territory will continue to be occupied by Ukraine. And that goes back to our earlier discussion about Ukraine having to accept some kind of arrangement that allows Russia to continue to occupy Ukrainian territory. Now, when it comes to whether or not a ceasefire with those kinds of parameters will mean that Ukraine is safe from further Russian demands, that's something that the Ukrainian leadership, as well as most of the European leaders, have actually stressed throughout this period of the war, that Russia is simply not to be trusted. And unless there's a significant change in the policies of the Russian government or a new government, Russia simply cannot be trusted, and that there's a very high likelihood that even with a ceasefire, as long as Russia continues to occupy parts of Ukrainian territory, in the future, Russia might seek more territory, or they might turn their attention to Poland or the Baltic states. So the Europeans are certainly very concerned about the potential over the long term for Russia to seek greater territorial gains.
Yes, exactly, Ross, and that leads me on to my next question. How much weight do Europe have in these discussions? We've seen European powers like the UK, France, etc., the European heavyweights that are also staunch supporters of Kiev come into this discussion and say that that Ukraine will need sovereignty, and also promises for European security remain a concern. Do you think that's in Donald Trump's head as well coming into these talks?
When it comes to the Europeans, I think And of course, we should always be cautious of getting into Donald Trump's head. But when it comes to the Europeans and what President Trump is thinking about them, I think at the moment, the best we should assume is that President Trump thinks that whatever I negotiate with Putin, just like Ukraine, the Europeans are going to have to take it or leave it as well. And President Trump might have some leverage over the Europeans, whether that's with regard to weapons sales, with regard to the recent trade agreement and possibly reopening it. So it's very similar to what the approach to Ukraine might be, assuming there is parameters of a ceasefire. I think President Trump is going to put a lot of pressure on the Europeans not to object to it. Now, up to now, the Europeans have been extremely united, with very few exceptions, in their support for Ukraine. And that unity has lasted over 3 years. But will it last when there's a ceasefire proposal on the table? That's unknown.
Yes, Ross, thank you. Do stay with us for further global updates. We will, of course, continue to bring you all the updates on that ongoing conflict and, of course, covering those talks when they happen on August the 15th in Alaska. We now move on to the defining crisis of West